Today we're going to be talking about the prosperity gospel. There was a recent report issued from the study by the Lifeway Research that found the following things. First, most churchgoers believe that God wants to bless them financially. Secondly, among about a third of Protestant churchgoers, they say their congregation teaches them that God will bless them if they donate money. And third, 1 in 4 say that they have to do something for God in order to receive material blessings in return. Now, the report goes on to say that these responses were not consistent or uniform across the full spectrum of Protestant churches. However, those churches that were most likely to identify themselves as being evangelical, they tended to agree with these statements more. Now, this opens up a couple of questions for us to talk about today. First of all, what does our faith teach us about prosperity? And second, while we may not hold a prosperity view towards material blessings, do we in fact have a prosperity view towards non-material blessings? Well, one text that is often used to support this idea of prosperity theology comes from the 8th chapter of Deuteronomy, verse 18. Let's listen to this and consider what can be derived from this that would support a gospel theology. But remember the Lord your God, for he is who gives you the power to get wealth, so that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your ancestors, as he is doing today. Well, for starters, this text implies first that the power to get wealth is sourced from God. Secondly, there's an idea here that we are to remember God so that we will receive his power. We also see that we are to do something for God or something to God. And finally, we could read and understand that we're promised wealth because of covenant promises made to our ancestors. Now, would these be proper interpretations related to the prosperity gospel? Is this the right way to think about this particular verse? Well, if we read the entire chapter, we'll see that the context of this verse has a completely different message. This is not a promise as much as it is a warning. It was delivered to the people at the end of their wilderness experience as they were preparing to go out and enter into the promised land. You see, in the wilderness, they lived a very dependent life, totally dependent on God for all that they had, and it was a meager existence by many standards. Now, as they got ready to go into the promised land, God was issuing a warning to them, saying, you're getting ready to go into a land of abundance. And there's going to be a tendency for you to feel like that somehow this abundance that you've been given is deserved. In other words, it's something that you've earned. Well, there will be multiple lessons that we could learn from this. For sure, we could learn that the idea here is to live life humbly and to thank God continuously for our abundance in all areas of life, and to dispense with the notion that somehow we can earn God's favor by our own actions towards him. Now, our next verse that we want to look at comes from the Gospel of John, and we're going to be taking a look at chapter 10, verse 10. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I came that you may have life and have it abundantly. Well, this is also another popular verse often cited to support the idea of the prosperity theology. The idea of abundance here can be construed to mean success and even material accumulation of more than we need. Does that sound like the message that Jesus would have delivered? Does that sound like the Jesus you've come to know? Well, the verse finds its context in the preceding 3 verses where Jesus uses the metaphor of a sheep gate to describe himself. You see, the abundant life is kingdom life, and Jesus is the gate through which he comes to offer us that life. Kingdom life and its abundance is not necessarily synonymous with material wealth. But be careful not to miss what kingdom abundance applies for us. We receive a blessing that brings us hope, joy, and salvation. It's the abundant life that embraces God's mercy and love for us, regardless of the circumstances of our earthly situation. Now, our third verse deals with the subtleties of the prosperity gospel, which are often part of our personal theology. While we might not buy into the prosperity gospel, when it comes to tangible and material blessings, we often have a belief that our lives will improve and be enhanced based on the degree of our faithfulness to God. Listen to Romans 8:28 and see if you can identify this concept. We know that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. Now, one could interpret this as saying if we love God, our life is going to work out for the better. As long as we love God, we will be covered. One of the stories in our lesson material this week was about a professor at Duke's Divinity School who did her doctoral thesis on the idea of the prosperity gospel. She seemed very confident in her rejection that this was just plain bad theology. And that was until she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. At that point, she came to realize the lure of this theology and how prevalent it was in her life, particularly related to her health. You know, beneath the surface, many Christians, including myself, want to believe that we can fix things in our lives by fixing our faithfulness. This verse is not about our circumstances. It's about God, his sovereignty, and his independence of humankind. God's plans always work out. Now, admittedly, we have to wrestle with why God's plans don't always seem to solve our specific problems. We also need to understand that with God's plans, there's always timing. Often we need the passage of time to see how they do in fact benefit us. Our final passage that we'll take a look at comes from the Gospel of Matthew, and we'll be taking a look at chapter 16, verse 24. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Here we find in Jesus' instructions to those who would become his followers. This statement almost single-handedly disputes the prosperity gospel. When we choose to become his follower, we're choosing an abundant life, but not by worldly standards. Denying oneself and taking up crosses, well, they aren't exactly wealth-building activities. Certainly not the kind of worldly wealth that sometimes is associated with the prosperity gospel. In fact, you can almost be assured that choosing to follow Jesus will lead to some choices that won't necessarily make your human condition easier or abundant. But isn't that the point? We're either children of God or we're children of the world. We must choose, but we shouldn't choose to follow Jesus based on worldly prosperity because he's not concerned with that type of prosperity. You know, as we conclude today's study, I'm reminded of Jesus' words from the Sermon on the Mount where he says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." You know, today may be a good day for us to examine whether or not we have a quid pro quo type of approach to God in our relationship with him. Is it really something for something? Is that the way we view our arrangement with God? You know, God already loves us so much, and there's nothing we can do about it. Let's don't make the mistake of trying to earn some type of benefit from God by our deeds and our faithfulness. Let's also stop and thank God today for all of our blessings beyond what we could ever deserve. Well, listen, I hope today is helpful to you. I hope it's a word of encouragement for you, a word of reflection. I hope that you'll consider what God is speaking to you through today's verses. I also hope you'll have a great week. Come back and join us again next week. God bless you. See you next time.